We are live. Welcome everyone to the Reason We Learn. Happy lunchtime. So if you are new to the channel, welcome to the channel. What you'll find here is content related to America's education system. My aim here is to educate primarily parents, but also other educators, and to help our students get the best possible education they can get. So if you wouldn't mind, please hitting that like button for this video, share this out to people who would be interested in parental rights as they pertain to education today. And if you like what you see here, I hope you consider subscribing and supporting my work. I also have a locals community, which is a great place to dig deeper into these topics and meet other parents and educators who are trying to improve education. And that's at thereasonwelearn.locals.com. Today, I am privileged to have with me someone I've followed on Twitter for quite some time, Jody Stone. She appeared on my radar because I'm very concerned with parental rights and teaching all of you about parental rights. And that is what Jody does. She has in her bio, parental rights is the hill I will die on. So I'm going to let her introduce herself and explain how she came to this kind of work. She is a mom, right? Primarily, you're a mom.
Yeah, mom of three.
Right. Accidental education advocate.
Completely accidental.
Tell us.
I'm a mom of three. I live in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. It's a beautiful small town in Rhode Island. And I have three girls, about to be a junior, a freshman, and a seventh grader. My youngest is dyslexic, and we moved back to East Greenwich, which is my hometown where I'm from. We moved away, married my husband, who was a Southerner, and lived in Nashville for a while. And when we came back, I was like, we're moving to East Greenwich. That's where I want to live and raise my kids. And I'm going to send them to the public school. I didn't go to the public high school in East Greenwich. I went to a private school in Providence, Rhode Island. And I was like adamant. I'm like, I am sending them to that. It's a great school. It's the best in the state. We're going there. And so I did. And it became evident early on. My youngest was in kindergarten. My oldest was in third. So I had three in elementary school when we moved back, that something was going on. And dyslexia does run very deeply and strongly in my family. So I had concerns right with my middle daughter, who wasn't very severe because it's a spectrum. But with my youngest, I knew immediately. And so in advocating for her and trying to figure out how to get her help and services, I came up surprisingly against a lot of pushback and found some shocking things out that I really didn't sit well with me. And I became this educational advocate because I swore to my husband that I would never let another parent go through what we went through, feeling alone, and that they were the crazy ones. So
can you give us some examples when you say you got pushback? Because some people in the audience are actually grandparents, or their kids have already left school, or maybe they haven't had kids yet. And so whenever we describe things like gatekeeping and pushback, it's hard for them to picture it. Give us some examples.
Well, it's hard for anybody to imagine when your kids are that young and you're idealistic young mom, that your school that you're volunteering in, that you're bringing gift cards in at every holiday for all the staff and custodians, that they're going to push back at you when you go try to get some help. So, it first starts with meeting with the teacher, and they're kind of like, oh, well, no, she's doing this, and she's fine, and she'll catch up. And you believe that, you do, as you're like, okay. But, I think I had the benefit of her being my third girl. There was no gender differences, nothing like that going on, very close in age. I was like, this is different, something's wrong. And so I pushed, so I asked about dyslexia. And I went home and I looked up online, like how to get some testing done. And immediately it's like, no, she doesn't need testing. It's like, oh, okay. Just things like that. But then I intuitively could just read the room that I wasn't getting the full story. And so I started researching on my own. And I can tell you that every single step in how to access services for your child at the elementary school level anyway, there is a roadblock or a pushback or a stall. And this is where I became really strongly aligned with parental rights. I immediately knew that I was the underdog, that everybody in that school and the administration, not necessarily the teachers, like they're great teachers, they're teaching, but to get to the services, to get actual reading services from a reading specialist, there's a pushback on that. And I eventually found out that's all tied to money and quotas and all of that.
Right.
But that's how I started on this. And I realized, it was just one and interrupt me if you need to, but it was just one step after another. So I learned that, and here's a parental right. Your children are required, public schools are required to benchmark your child at least 3 times a year. It's a federal guideline that all states have to do. So there's 3 times a year from the time your child is in kindergarten to 12th grade where your school uses a benchmark across the district, across your state. Everybody across the country does this. They all use different ones, which I think is a mistake, but our state used, I believe it was iReady at the time. I can't really remember.
These are done by testing.
They're like little 30 assessments. Yep, they have to do them. So, and if you go in to check that if they're using, it depends on the program they're using. So we used for reading instruction, I think it was a Fontes and Pinnell, which is eventually I found one of the worst. It's a whole other topic.
Yes, right.
That there's even timelines. So they have to test like in fall, winter, and spring before a certain date. So typically it's like, it should be coming up now. It's like early October. Late September, early October. There's a 3-week window that they have to test these children for benchmark purposes, to track growth.
Right.
So in advocating for my daughter, another mom was like, you need to ask for her educational record. Write a letter. If you write it, if you ask for it in writing, they're required to give you all of her educational data. And I was asking for her testing. Could I have her testing? And I would get like a spelling test or like a writing assignment or something like that. I didn't know I had to use specific language like assessment or benchmark because they knew, but I didn't know. I wasn't asking for the right item or using the right language. So that's when I realized this is how they're getting away with not giving me her information. So long story short, I requested the whole educational file, including all benchmarks for the last 3 years. And I found out, and this is going on now, she's going into 2nd grade or 3rd grade. It's a little iffy now, but she was listed in kindergarten as like 10th percentile urgent intervention. And I was never notified. And this is, at the time I was furious, but every parent I've spoken to, and I have now spoken to and helped hundreds of parents, when they do that, it's the exact same thing. Urgent intervention in K. And schools like to wait. It's called the wait to fail model, which I've been advocating against for almost a decade now. They wait until 3rd grade to intervene with children with appropriate reading instruction. They wait for the child to fall 2 grade levels behind. And
is there a rationale for that?
Well, I believe it's because state testing starts to happen in 3rd grade and they have to test these kids. And that's the only reason they do it in the first place, or they would avoid it altogether. But they have to because there is, it's called the child fine mandates, another parental right. It's a child fine mandate. It's a federal mandate where school districts are required by law to fine children, all children that have a disability, a learning disability. And dyslexia happens to be one of the 13 listed in the federal guidelines of under a disability category. And they just avoid it altogether. They will fine severe and profound children, but they really do not like to waste those dollars on children with reading disabilities. And they do everything they can to keep them out of special education. But if you're a parent and you're being told everything is fine until 3rd grade, when they have to tell you because the state testing starts, and then they intervene at that point, your child is never going to catch up. 4th grade is when you learn to read until 3rd grade.
Right.
In 4th grade, you read to learn. So if your child is already 2 years behind their peers and you've known it since they were in kindergarten, 1st grade, they are never going to catch up. Their educational trajectory is tanking. It's never going to happen. And now they're starting, it's socialization, they're getting pulled out. Like, it's just the way to fail model needs to go. Early intervention is key. And parents need to know what their rights are to hold schools accountable, to get the instruction that their child deserves in kindergarten and 1st grade.
Why do you think they do it? I mean, there's there's the money that's supposed to be there to provide the services. And it feels to me from listening to your story, like the incentives are in the wrong place. Like somehow the teachers are being incentivized, either incentivized to push back or disincentivized to tell you the truth.
Right.
And what do you...
Well, I think, to be honest with you, and I learned this the hard way, and I've apologized to many teachers, because a lot of times the kindergarten and 1st grade teachers, they don't even know all of the policy and federal guidelines about reading instruction and what parental rights are and what student rights are really to receiving that type of instruction. So they're just they're like, oh, and it's true. Some kids, maybe didn't have like pre-K, or some kids are falling behind by the time they're in kindergarten. But with children with dyslexia and specific learning disabilities, which is, another term they use instead of dyslexia, which just adds to the confusion,
right.
And SLP, SLD, specific learning disability, they will try to push that off so they don't have to intervene. Sorry, I had lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
So these teachers, they don't really know that the policy that the school has set to them, like, we're going to see if these kids can catch up. Let's try to catch them up outside of the classroom, or with a little bit of one-on-one instruction. And then we don't have to enter them into special education. We don't have enough we don't have enough reading specialists for that child or this group. So I almost need like an infographic, but the way that it works at the elementary school level, like our K through 5 had one reading specialist for the whole district. Now for the whole school. I know there's a school in Providence because there was a lot of interest in Providence recently with the Johns Hopkins report that came out just saying how horrible Providence schools were. And a reading specialist was interviewed in the Providence Journal. She is one reading specialist for 700 children. Like, they need more reading specialists, but they cost more. And then what's the point if you're sending half of these kids to a reading specialist? What's going on in the kindergarten classroom, first grade classroom, that these kids aren't learning to read? And then that goes back to the reading program they're using, which, is Fontes and Pinnell, which misses 30% of children that we know. Right. So they know, I know they know. I can't give you an answer as to why.
Right. It's just one of those, like, I think it's safe to say that people who ought to be, really focused on making sure there really is the early intervention, especially if you're going to label the child early intervention.
Right.
And then you simultaneously and paradoxically have a policy of way to fail. It seems like you're knowingly failing the child. They are
knowingly failing the child. And I will never forget, a second grade teacher said to me, so at some point when your child is 2 grade levels behind, especially if you're asking questions, they have to refer your child to RTI, per the Child Find Mandate, which RTI is the acronym for Response to Intervention. Now, they've changed that even within policies in schools and states to be used as MTSS, multi-tiered system of supports, but it's basically RTI, and it is a requirement by federal law that all schools have to find children with disabilities and to intervene with them. So the policy in my district, and policy is not law, so I challenged it and got her intervention earlier, is at 2 grade levels behind. And it's typically, and I've learned this now because I've dealt with enough kids in the district, that in March of 2nd grade, they will refer children to RTI. So, and what that is it's they pull your child out. They don't put them in special education. They're not referring them for special education. They're pulling them out of the gen ed classroom into a group of like 5 or 6 with a reading specialist who is a certified reading teacher. So K through 3 teachers are not certified in the teaching of reading. Unless you are a reading specialist, you are not certified to teach people to read.
Right. So I wanted to make sure that the audience understands a couple of things that you've been saying, because I'm trying to like translate into layman terms.
I'm dumping.
No. It's great. It's such valuable information, but I'm just trying to so there are kids who organically have dyslexia, which you recognize in your daughter as early as kindergarten, you knew from family history.
Yes.
And that exists in the population. You will have a certain percentage. Yes. Maybe you know better than I do what the percentage likely of sort of, inborn
true and severe dyslexia. It depends on who you're asking, but people say between 5 to 15%.
Okay. Now we also have 30%, separate and apart from that, we have 30% of children. So we're now at 45% of children who are not going to learn to read using the methodology they're currently teaching, not just in Rhode Island, but in a lot of states across the country. Some call it 3Q, whatever you want to call it. It is not
balanced literacy.
Right. Fancy term for not teaching your kid to read.
Yeah.
It is not what I think parents imagine my kids are going to be learning. A makes the sound at. No, they're not learning
not
that
anymore. And we assume that because that's how we were taught in schools. I mean, I'm 47. So, and I think that
55, yeah.
the whole language movement started in the late 70s, early 80s. So by the time I got really into schools, it was like mid 80s, 90s.
Right.
And so now I mean, and if you track the timeline of when they started using all of that stuff, you can see the proficiency rates go right down with it.
Correct. And I've pointed that out on this channel so many times. And that then when you have this 45% that are already just not being taught to read in school properly.
Or some that can. I mean, they're super intelligent kids, so they can get there.
Right. If you have very high IQ or your parents have worked with you at home, and there's, of course, then you end up with other gaps.
Yeah.
But I wanted to lay that out.
Yeah.
Because it's important to understand how the system, which, by the way, and I'm speaking to the commenter, this is Lucy, before I read her comment, I would say parents in the United States, similar to China, we are required to send our children to the school in our zip code.
We are compelled to send
them there by law, unless we can come up with the money to send it to something private. Okay. Yeah. The money is forcibly taken from us already as far as taxes. And we are actually supposed to be a free country where our government doesn't get to put a gun to our head, take our money, and then say, it's also your responsibility to prepare them and keep them at the right level.
I am not a teacher.
Right. I was. And I, because I refused to teach 3Q, amongst other reasons, I ended up leaving the classroom. But because I taught first and second grade.
I'd like to address this question.
Please do. There's one more that follows up.
Okay.
Also,
why wouldn't it partially be the parents' fault for never reading with their child or paying attention to them in the first place? I mean, that's a huge assumption. I think anyone that's advocating for their child is clearly paying attention to their child. But if you want to take mine, for example, mine is the youngest of three. My mother-in-law is an award-winning poet and author. She took my children to the library every single day. When I worked, she would take them 3 or 4 days a week. We read to them ridiculously. And it was interesting because of my third, I knew like the who, what, why, where, whens. She couldn't remember from page to page. Like she didn't recognize them. Like she didn't recognize, she kept trying to like sound it out again. And there's certain cues for that. And there's mountains of research that say that with a dyslexic child or a child with an actual true learning disability, that I could read to them until they were 18 and they would still never learn phonetically how to break down language.
And then this one, I find it in American parents are often very irresponsible towards their own children. They always blame it on the school system. I don't like words like always and never, first of all, when we're talking about millions of people.
Yeah.
And as we have just explained to you, we're not only forced into the school system, we're forced into their methodology. The kids are there 8 hours a day. And
we're forced into the programs they're choosing for our children.
We don't have a say in that. And trying to get your kid who's already been there for 8 hours a day to do something else on top of that, when you're talking about 6-year-olds, is a tall ask. It really is.
And where it says like not intervening themselves, that is not the job of parents. Are there to advocate for their children, but we send our children to school. We are compelled by law to send our children to school and they take our tax dollars to do that, to educate our children. The basics are reading, writing, and arithmetic. Like at least through 8th grade, I think it's a requirement. You're just like an IDEA, your child should be guaranteed the ability to learn to read and write from a teacher that you are paying with your tax dollars.
I think there's some confusion on the part of this commenter that she thinks that we don't pay for schools.
I think that's actually a lot of
there's no such thing as free.
There's no free. It's our tax dollars go. And when you want to get into that, I will happily discuss the PPEs, pure per pupil expenditures, and how much each school district gets per child in each state, in each school.
Yeah,
it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, and I am a fierce advocate for parents, and we all know there are irresponsible parents. We all know that happens.
Yeah, or there's parents
to treat the vast majority. To treat the vast majority that way is not only statistically inaccurate, it's incredibly unfair, because this has been going on for over 100 years, that the government has conscripted our children into a system that we have very little say over. And they made the decision to go with this reading methodology when we had the science of reading, which we'll get into in a moment.
Yeah.
But as I said, I wanted people to understand the numbers, that 15% roughly in the dyslexia.
Yeah, it depends. The severe and profound dyslexia it depends on who you're asking.
Reading's not going to be an automatic thing away.
No. And reading isn't an automatic thing for anybody, actually. It's just that certain brains have the ability to connect all of that information quickly, and others have like longer integers. It's a whole, I can get into that if you want to. it takes longer and more direct, explicit
right.
instruction to make the connections.
Exactly. And then I know too, there are homeschoolers like me
Yep.
who have, who, if my children had gone to the public school, I mean, actually I did. I had one who entered in kindergarten.
Okay.
And of my 3 daughters, she reads the least well. Okay.
Yeah.
So in other words, and she was taught to read using this methodology. She now says, I wasn't taught to read, Mom, and she hates to read.
Mhm.
She struggles with reading, but she gets by. She does okay, but it's much harder for her. My other 2 kids learned using All About Reading and using more Orton Gillingham method, that
Yeah.
kind of thing, which I taught them. And they're avid readers and they are proficient readers. However, my eldest daughter did not begin to read, in a way that she demonstrated. She was willing to
Right.
demonstrate that she was
Right.
reading till she was at least 7.
Oh,
Okay. Had she been in the public school, they might have marked her all kinds of problems, which she actually didn't have. It's just that she has ADD. She's also on the
yeah.
spectrum, which we didn't discover until
Yeah.
many years later because girls hide it.
Yep.
And her psychology was such that, like, I'm not going to show you I can do it till I can do it perfectly. So
Yep.
let's also take into account that in every school population, you will also have this sliver of kids who will be able to read just fine if you don't get in their way
Yeah.
at some point. But because school is school and it's on a timeline and we need to move from here to
Yeah.
here to here to here to
Yeah.
here, if you don't arrive when the train arrives at the station, if you're still,
You're behind.
you're going to be left behind, even if you had the ability to do it. There's nothing organically wrong with you,
No.
and so on. So there's kind of multiple points here that you have. Kids are different. One size fits all doesn't automatically work, which is why you have extra obligation to choose a methodology that works for
Yeah.
the most kids.
And that's not offered in schools. They don't have choices. Teachers don't have choices. They have to use what the school district
Exactly.
invests in, the program they invested in. And so,
Right. And then you add on top of that gatekeeping.
Yeah.
And when you, the parent, want to be responsible, and when you're in there and you're volunteering and you're reading to your kids and you're like, hello, something's wrong.
Yeah.
Remember, your child is sitting there every single day as you bang on the doors. So months go by, possibly years go by, while you are trying to get your kid the help they are entitled to because you've paid for it. You have paid for it, and they're floundering in the meantime.
And I think what another parental thing, I'm trying to use like the key things I learned along the way that were like aha moments for me, is one was that so my daughter, they do a thing called social promotion now. They rarely hold children back unless they're in kindergarten, which again, if your child has dyslexia or it's in your family, I would never recommend doing that, because if you're not going to change the instruction method, how is the child going to relearn anything? But my daughter was in 3rd grade when we ended up getting her into the Hamilton School, which is a dyslexic school here in a really renowned dyslexia school here in Providence, Rhode Island. And they told me she was in 3rd grade in East Greenwich and she was functionally illiterate. They were crying when I met with the teacher the first time. And she was crying to me and said, it's a testament to how bright this child actually is. And we'd done all the neuropsychs. Like I could see how bright she is. The discrepancy was in a few certain key areas, which signifies what her issue was in the first place. But when she moved there and she was already terrified, hated going to school, crying all the time, so anxious because she couldn't read. And the teacher said to me, this would have been, I would equate this to her going to school in like France or Greece all day and getting by. And like that shows the strength and like the mask she had to wear every day because she can't read or spell at all. And they were like, she was getting intervention at that point. She was getting some intervention, but it was nowhere. She was way too far behind.
Right. So you decided, okay, I'm going to go whole hog and become an advocate, not just for my child, but for children, like period.
Well, sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No,
well, I just remember being so angry one day. Like my husband was sitting at the couch. I remember it like vividly. And I was like, pacing. And I was like, I just can't believe this. And then this, and this, and then this one did this. And look at that. And he's like, okay. I'm like, and what about those other kids that are in that RTI class with her? I know that mom isn't paying attention. I know that mom doesn't know. And he's like, Jody, take care of our kids. And then you can go help other families. And I was like, I will never let another child, because I felt crazy. I let it go on too long because I let them gaslight me into being like, oh, she's going to catch up. I allowed that. And I will never let another parent ever feel that way, because what happens to you through this process is you come across things that are so unbelievably egregious that you can't believe it's happening. And people don't believe you. They're like, what? And then that can lead into our Pupil Protection Act discussion, because it's another example of a law that parents don't even believe exists. because they can't imagine they actually have those rights. And when you start learning your rights and advocating for them and using them back at the schools, you get the wheels start turning. It's a totally different game once they know your rights.
Right. And so to that end, let's go specifically, possibly like one by one. Are there discrete rights you can list for the audience? They can possibly take notes and hopefully make a difference in their own children's lives.
Well, it's interesting because that you asked me this, because it actually, that list doesn't exist, which is really frightening to me. That list of what are your parents' rights in schools doesn't exist anywhere publicly. But I'm actually working with a state rep here in Rhode Island this week to draft legislation to make students' rights and parents' rights a viable thing here in Rhode Island, because you don't know. So I piecemealed it, and I can tell you, like RTI, response to intervention and child fine mandates, those are federal laws. Start there if you're looking for rights. But this is something almost like Miranda rights. A parent that's entering their child into public school and kindergarten should be handed a packet that says, here are all the laws and rights and federal guidelines and regulations that we are held to.
Right.
And that dollars are denied to us if we don't follow. And these are your rights, parents. And so child find, RTI, your right to records, and to your,
it's like a HIPAA
child's
form
records
for school.
Yeah. I mean, but it's so much more detailed than that. Like you are parents do have strong rights. And I think right now, parents are so disenfranchised across this country with public education. I mean, I can't even believe what I'm witnessing right now. But Erica Sanzi, who I know you follow as well, said this to me once, and I say it all the time. Parents are losing their rights at the schoolhouse door. And that is not what schools were intended for. That is not how schools in this country were intended to be run. We have a right. We have a right to curriculum. School departments have to vote on curriculum in a public forum for parents to say, but they hide it. They don't want your opinions on it most of the time.
Well, they're also doing it at higher and higher levels. So what I notice is it's like higher and lower, in the sense that when Common Core came in, it was kind of like this state board, even those who said we're not going to do Common Core, the teachers are still like, but we are, so
right. Well, we still do it in Rhode Island.
Right. The state board makes these high level curriculum decisions, but the local school boards that may have in the past chosen books, chosen specific stuff, or at least participated in that choice so that it was transparent, they don't do that anymore.
No,
it's all
they're taking the books out of the classroom altogether. They're teaching new math. So, there's no math book. You can't even learn it yourself to help teach your child because there's no math book.
They're keeping it as far removed from the parents as possible.
Right.
And then unless you've got a teacher who's got a ton of integrity and really cares about parental rights, they are under no obligation to follow any lesson plans they can choose that day.
They can choose that day. I think when I first moved back to East Greenwich, I think somebody did a survey of the teachers, and there was like 28 available reading programs a teacher could choose from, or math programs a teacher could choose from. I mean, I think it's been cleaned up since then, and actually what's happened in Rhode Island is even more removing more oversight from the local level. Is the state, I think a few years ago, came up with 6 curriculum for all subjects and made districts can choose from one of 6, and that's it.
Right.
And, so those conversations are gone. Like we don't get to choose or advocate for specific things that we think are right for our children.
Right.
So they're just taking all the local control away is what's happening.
Right. So that's one of the things I've been advocating for on the channel is to tell parents, who are actually yelling at the school board, like unfortunately that they're not the go-tos anymore unless you want to get rid of your superintendent and possibly some, and even that's not easy, right?
What's happening with school boards now is the unions own the school boards. The unions fund campaigns and get union lawyers, sometimes union representatives. In Rhode Island, we had like a union leader sitting on a board on a school committee. And that is, school committees were created to represent parents and families. Teachers have unions. That's great for them. Teachers have unions to advocate for them. The school committees are supposed to be for the families and for the parents and for the students, not for the state, not for the teachers, but parents are we have no one advocating for us anymore or our children.
Right. And also now those school board members are required to get training from school board associations. School board
Yes,
associations get a lot of their
which
training material
which
from
have their own
unions.
unions.
They have their own union, and so do the
Correct.
school superintendents, and everybody gets their training materials. If you follow the training
Yes.
materials, it all goes back to the union.
And this is what, so Rhode Island is so small. We have like 36 or 38 separate school districts. So, and what's happened is they are all talking. So all the superintendents talk, all of the teachers associations talk, the unions, there's 2 big unions in the state. They all talk. The Rhode Island Department of Education is overseeing it all. The Principals Association, the Athletic Association, they all talk and meet. They're all planning things and implementing things strategically and across the state in unison. And parents are not allowed to speak. If I comment or chirp in on a district in, like, say, 2 towns over, someone's like, oh, do you live here? Like, a teacher will chime in, or a union rep, do you live in this town? Or what? I'm not allowed to help another parent advocate around you. We need parent unions talking to each other, and which is starting to happen. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. I mean, and they're fighting hard here.
Right.
So
hopefully they'll be able to fight to just say, all right, y'all, can we just have our money back, and we're going to find our
yeah, well, but that's the other, they're also working with the legislature in Rhode Island. I think it's 80% Democratic at the state house and at the state level. So you can't even get, not to say that they're anti-charter, but in our state it is anti-charter. And they put a moratorium on charter schools in Providence. And we've got a wait list of, like, I think at the last time it was like close to 15,000 children. I mean, a couple of years ago it was 5. And these representatives that are representing these families voted against opening charter schools when wait lists are years long. So we're locking these kids into schools that are failing and without choice. And it's heartbreaking.
Yep.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And it really, really is. And now, of course, too, when you said where parents are losing their rights at the schoolhouse door, we've just been talking a lot about the special needs side of things, the reading side of things, the free and appropriate education, IDEA, all that services. But now there's also that component of the demographic surveys, the climate surveys, the, social emotional learning and things like that. Have you been doing any work with parental rights as far as that goes?
Well, yeah, it's funny. So we connected a little bit over me just tweeting about the PAPRA, which is I want to say it correctly. It's the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, PPRA, which I always used to refer to as like the survey law. And I would tweet about it all the time and tell people, like, do you understand that they can't give your children surveys asking these questions, that they need your permission to do so, that if it's under any of these 8 protected categories, which is how the law originally was written, under 8 protected categories that are personally identifiable information or about your beliefs or your belief system or your politics or your religion or your gender, they can't ask that without permission, and it cannot be required. It is not a requirement. And when I first saw that, and I found that years ago advocating for my kids, I was like, what? Because this is happening all the time at every level in my school. All the time the kids are saying, oh, I had to do a quiz test today. I had to answer questions about drugs. I had to answer questions about, drinking. You can read the law. I don't have it in front of me, but they're not allowed to do that without specifically getting your permission to do so. And you can opt out, and they have to let you know that you can opt out from that. And it can't just be a passive suggestion that you can opt out. They have to literally like say you can opt out of this.
It's my understanding from reading the law that it is also a requirement that every state, at least, but oftentimes districts have their own supplemental policy, but they can only make it easier, not harder.
Correct.
To have it very easily accessible to you, the opt-out process and the notification of each and every survey.
Right. Correct.
Okay. So they can't just like sneak it into a lesson, like,
and
let's do an art class or let's do this. And they are sneaking them in. And who are the people administering these things too? They're not licensed clinicians.
No.
They are teachers coloring outside the lines of their endorsements and their certifications. It's basically practicing psychology.
It is.
And they're collecting the data and keeping it, aren't they?
Correct. Yes. Or giving it to a third party, which they're supposed to disclose as well. And, the law, unless it's for like research purposes for like curriculum or district, they can do it. So they're getting around any parents that do push back on this, or when a populace becomes educated on their rights and pushes back on it. This is how they get around it. But but you're seeing it. It's like seeping into everything now. Like you said, art classes or what.
Yep.
And so that's how they're getting around having to notify parents. A lot of districts, and this also is concerning me because we're seeing everything go to virtual and online now. They're slipping into like the student handbook you have to sign off on. Like, those first few weeks of school, you're getting
So
hundreds of
busy.
emails, hundreds of packets. Sign this, sign that, send in this form, and it's in there. Just sign this, and it's in there. And but that's passive consent. So, if you really wanted to fight it, you could, because it's not what the law is intended for.
It's
And
supposed
how
to be
it's supposed to be done.
explicit. You're
Supposed to be
supposed
explicit.
You're supposed to give explicit consent.
And I posted about it the other day because a parent shared with me a screenshot that her child sent her during the day of a survey that a teacher had submitted to the children that was, on a Google form. And it was, when you're on Google Forms, you can tell it's a required question. It won't let you answer the next one if you're familiar with Google Forms.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And it'll say required. And the question was, what are your pronouns? And it was a requirement. Now, and that took me back because we're not allowed to ask race. We're not allowed to ask gender. We're not allowed to ask about sexual preferences. We're not allowed to ask about religious or political beliefs. How is your pronoun outside of that? It's not. And I have no issue with the usage of pronouns, the need for children to feel that it is appropriate for them to feel free to use whatever pronoun they want. That is that child's right. But it should be an option for other children who do not feel comfortable answering that question. And I can use an example of what happened to my daughter, who we moved her from private school to public school to private school. And I think the private schools have been using pronouns forever, like for a really long time. I shouldn't say forever, for a much longer time than public schools have. And she's just not used to that. She wasn't used to it. So she was at a field trip, and they in a circle group, they were like, oh, let's go around and introduce ourselves. And let's stop. Let's use our pronouns. And my daughter had never done that before. So she was like, I don't know. And they were like, oh, are you non-binary? And she was like, what? No, not that that's bad. Like, she just got she goes, no, I don't even know what does that mean? And I was like, it occurred to me at that moment. And it was this 2 days later, the survey from my town came out to another child. And I was like, wait, this is protected under this law. This should be, a child shouldn't have to answer that and shouldn't be asked that question publicly, just like they're not asked any of those other questions.
Yeah, to your point, is if the student, and you would assume at that point the parents also know, you would like to believe, if the student is going to go at the beginning of the year, go to the teachers and say, look, I'd like to be they, them, or whatever, could you call me that? That's obviously their right to do.
Yes.
Remember, the student has pretty much unlimited free speech within reason. I mean, they can't just be, cursing at people, but the student can ask for that. The student has many more rights for speech than the teacher. But to say we're going to ask everyone is introducing a whole, now you're introducing a dynamic that is a whole, you're adding confusion. You're doing all kinds of things that requires explanation. It's not a grammar lesson.
For mine, it did. And as a freshman in high school, she was like, and it was her first day. It was the day before classes started, so the class could all meet. She was totally taken back by it. And then, to get, are you non-binary? She was like, what? No, not that that's bad. Like, I guess like, and they were like, yeah, that's fine. And she was like, mommy, I was like, it's fine. I'm like, now, but it just wasn't part of what she had been taught in school, or was not used to it, totally taken back. And it occurred to me, I was like, this is where, PAPRA, I think, is effective. And I do not think for 1 second that teachers are being egregious about that, or trying to just,
it's fashion. It's custom.
I don't think they know that it's against the law to do that. It's against the law.
And I think if you mention that
to require it,
and I think when you mention that to people, because I've done that, and I've said, that's against the law. And even people who don't like it, even people who disagree with it are like, but why? And then of course there are teachers, I have freedom of speech. And I'm like, actually, no,
you don't when it comes to things like that.
You're hired speech. And getting that point across this year has been so difficult. And I think, I kind of lost my train of thought, but I wanted to say, about the pronoun thing and all that. It also starts to get into that, the parents are losing their rights at the schoolhouse door. It gives the school the impression, even more so, that they are assuming a parental role. It almost incentivizes and encourages teachers to color outside the lines of those certifications.
Yeah.
If what about your certification for, 5th grade or even 6th grade had to do
It's
with
not in your licensure. You didn't get
it,
to study this in your licensing program, in your education program. So
right.
it's what's happening right now is bizarre.
And the other thing, somebody, so Bonnie Snyder was on here the other day, and she was talking about the codes of ethics that teachers are supposed to adhere to. Even the NEA has like a code of ethics. They just don't, follow it.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that these educators are supposed to be asking themselves is, whose needs are being served here? Mine
Right.
or the students, the adult or the student, right? And how does the second question that I've heard also is, how does this lesson, this question, this whatever it is, activity support the learning standard that I'm supposed to be teaching?
What
So
learning standards?
thank you. So then you have to say to
They're
yourself, like,
gone.
exactly what learning standard is being served by saying, what are your pronouns? And are your parents still married?
Well, that's the other. They're not allowed to ask those questions.
They're not allowed to, but they do. But they do. Let's do a privilege walk.
But here's the thing: I understand a child's need to express what their pronoun is, and I understand great teachers and trying to create an environment where that's what they want to do, and they want to make everybody feel comfortable. But when it's infringing on another child's uncomfortability and making them feel uncomfortable, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's uncomfortable.
We have to remember too that students don't have a right to comfort. They have a right to an education, and to a certain degree,
they'll say they don't here in Rhode Island. They don't have a right.
But to a certain degree, well, let's just say the schools have an obligation to provide it. That's a contract that is implicit. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, it's explicit to a large degree, because in many state constitutions, it's kind of in there at this point.
Not in ours.
Not in yours. Okay. No. But I know like in some states it is. And in others, it's.
I mean, if we're forced to pay for it, it should be a right. Yeah.
Correct. That's another thing people
and compelled by law to send our kids there.
Yeah. There's, like I said, it's sort of it's an entitlement. Let's put it that way. Once something is, you're compelled to pay for it, you now have an entitlement. Like we're compelled to pay Social Security, it becomes an entitlement, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to, I can hear an echo again. I don't know what's happening. Oh, there it goes.
Sorry.
So when they take these liberties and they do these things like that are just, have nothing to do with teaching the kid what they're supposed to know, I think parents assume that they're the one who doesn't understand. So what I'm getting from my audience is a sense of like, well, I'm just a parent, or I don't know. And that's reinforced by teachers unions and teachers saying parents don't know what they're talking about.
For example, I got hit with a lot of that when I started advocating.
You're not an expert. You're
not. Are you a teacher? Just now, it's. Are you a doctor? Like, and it's funny because there was a Twitter exchange today, and somebody went after a mom in my town saying, "Are you a doctor?" And I'm like, "No, she's a mom, and that's enough. She is a mom trying to navigate this through has to be one of the hardest times trying to educate and raise a child, and it's the moms that are changing the trajectory of what's going on with education right now, and they're pushing back. It's the moms. And I'm so tired of, are you a doctor? Are you an educator? I know more about RTI, child find, and the laws these teachers that teachers are required to implement with my child than most teachers do. And that's not a dig at them. That's a dig at their administration. And it speaks to their teaching college. Their teaching colleges should have taught them laws and obligations, just like a lawyer is taught certain things they have to do for children. Why is that not being taught? It's the whole profession. Yep. And it's almost like the ideologies are taking away from the profession too. I feel horrible for teachers today. They can't teach. They're constrained by so much and so many pressures, and their unions, what their unions want and what the administrators want. And it's just, let teachers teach.
So what ends up happening is, in my opinion, and as a person who left the profession very early into my career, like I barely had a career. It was like blink and you miss it. But if you're a person who went into it for what I would consider the right reasons. Like, you love teaching, you love kids, you love your
Yeah.
subject matter, you want to inspire, you want to support, you want to make sure you give as much individual attention as you can, all the good reasons, right? You
Yeah.
didn't go into it for the money. You're
No,
like,
I mean,
"Oh,
no,
okay,
that's
there's
the
a
first thing
paycheck,"
teachers
but
say. Like, right.
right, they'll say, but if that's really true,
It's true.
then when you get in and you have all those different things, you're the type of person who is so ill suited to that environment, to that institution, that you're likely to leave. You're
Right.
likely
Well,
to
right.
say,
That's what happens.
I can't deal with this. So you get a drain of people who have the right ethics, and morals and all
Yeah.
that to leave, and not to mention brain power. And it
Yep.
becomes a place where the people who are successful, because remember, not at teaching, that's not, what's
Yeah.
being incentivized is not effective teaching, but
Correct.
effective organization person.
Mm-hmm.
So you get people increasingly who are good little, organizational cogs
Yeah.
in the machine. And
Yeah.
then, of course, what are they trying to preserve? Their job, their image, their union,
Yeah.
their whatever it is, their salary, their paycheck. And if parents would, if more parents were able to kind of bang down that door more easily, and they realize, a third of the class is getting
Yeah.
services,
Well,
then it might come to light.
that's,
That
yes,
means that
they
most of
need,
the teachers can't teach.
well, or they're not, or the programs they're using
Exact one or
that
the other.
the program the administration's brought for these teachers to teach aren't working, or they're not paying for PD and professional development and training for their teachers, which is something I started pushing for, which is what that bill I testified
They
on
are,
a
but
few years ago. But
first they have to decenter the whiteness, Jody. So we've
it's
got to
pretty,
we have to
my
get through
heart is
that
breaking.
training, and then we can go to the training
I
about.
feel, yeah.
So the incentives, it feels like the incentives are just in the wrong place to support the children, and they're more in the place to support the
Right.
bureaucracy, the
And I can
organization.
tell you, we Rhode Island got a new head of the Department of Education commissioner a few years ago, and I was fully behind her for years. I'm questioning that now, but because she was pushing for teacher training, appropriate reading instruction, professional development, and she quoted, and this is when I was like, okay, all right. She said, we have an adult-centered system here in Rhode Island, not a student-centered one. And she met with families. She went to every district. She really did hear the tragic stories of these families. I don't like what she's done with a lot of the curriculum other than reading. She is getting us on the right track there. But yeah, I mean, we have an adult-centered system in the state of Rhode Island and in many states, and it's not student-centered. It's not students first. And I'm just a strong proponent of every decision that's made within that school building, and the people that we've elected and the people that those electors have hired to work within our schools should be student-centered, student first all the way. And I didn't start out as a proponent of school choice. I was very anti that, because I believed what I had heard and grown up hearing about school choice. It takes away from public schools. I am such a strong proponent of it now, because that's where teachers can go to actually teach. And it's where students can go to actually learn without all the bureaucracy and the
well, it
and the
also
ideologies.
Things people don't improve if they have no competition and everything, they
Right.
can continue on as they've been going. And in fact, they might even take things for granted and get worse. It's not,
Right.
you need a little bit of competition, a little bit of stress. Think about any
Yeah.
job you could do. If it's like, I have nowhere else to go, I have no one else to hire but you.
Right.
I always use the example of my traveling during my college years, when I traveled in the East Bloc countries, and I went to East Germany and even Hungary, and they were both under Soviet control. And when you go any place, even a restaurant or a hotel, the service was terrible. Service was just awful, because they were going to get a paycheck whether they were
Right.
good or not. You couldn't even tip them or pay them more. It was like, what's the point? They all had to provide the same service, and they were going to get
Right.
paid. So when something is assured,
De-leveling is what they're calling it in education right now. They're de-leveling classes. They're taking away valedictorians. They're taking away homecoming and making that just like a
they're
regular
taking away
thing.
merit. They're eliminating merit. They're eliminating achievement. And all of this, in my personal opinion, this is Deb talking, I can't prove this, but my guess is this is an attempted cover up of all of the malpractice and malfeasance, because they cannot close the achievement gap any other way. The only way you can close an achievement gap as big as we have it, or to raise, to make it look like our kids are improving, is if you lower the bar on what success
which is just
is.
so disenfranchising. I mean, and what are you saying to the children that well, we're going to help them. So we're going to de-level this class to bring more people up. Are you saying they can't achieve it on their own? Or are you saying you don't have the capacity to help them achieve it on their own? Like, so which is it? Because it's not the child's fault. None of this is the child's fault. None of it.
We are making our little children the burden bearers for, social justice, whatever, and it's completely unfair. And I don't like to use words like unfair, but it's unjust. It's truly unjust. You can't achieve justice. You can't achieve, anything good by doing something wrong.
Well,
by
I think
taking away from people.
The point I would make for that is then when these decisions are being made, and that's what the decisions are that they're making, it's clear evidence that the people sitting at that table are adult-centered and only thinking with adult brains, with adult cognitive ability, with adult decision-making, with adult consequence versus action, and putting all of that into a 5th grade classroom, a 3rd grade classroom, where these children are like, what? Like, at what point, at what step we have missed, like, okay, if this is what you want to do, if this social justice and de-leveling and all of this is really what you want to do, where's the evidence to back it up? Put it out publicly and be transparent about it. Show us how it's going to be implemented into the classrooms. Like, it's the lack of transparency and the hiding and lying about it that is just like, well, then what are we doing? If it's this good, if this is what is so needed, show me the data that says our children need this, that we need this as a society. I mean, the data, the real data and the real science. And it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
Right. And then they've gone so far as to say that asking for data itself is problematic. So, and you mentioned adult-centered, which I agree with you completely, but remember too, it's only some adults.
True.
It's Animal Farm. Some adults are more equal than others. So you're a parent, you're an adult, but your voice, I would prefer, if it were going to be adult-centered but towards parents, I think it would still be better than adult-centered towards the people who are in the system.
Yes, that's correct. Excellent point.
So I don't want to discount that, there are adults being served here and those their parents. Let's not cut them out, because we also, I think, in some, they'll claim that they're doing things that are student centric or for the student, which are really just about enabling bad behaviors, the sort of lack of discipline. We have to contextualize everything and understand the bully and understand this. And that may be child centered to some kinds of children, but not other kinds of children.
Right.
Okay, you don't want people to feel stigmatized and bad they didn't make it into a gifted program, but what happens to the gifted kid? They don't get anything.
Right.
So what the school systems are doing, as I look at it, is they're picking and choosing winners and losers, and they're doing it all with an eye towards self-preservation of the system.
See, I haven't dove that deep into it yet. I just see it as, I feel like they're forcing parents that can leave, whether they're scrapping together their last dollars to get their kids out. They're forced intentionally. I do believe it is an intentional movement to force parents out, because it is so uniform. It is happening so smoothly and in unison across the country at the same time that this was planned. Call me a
What do they gain? What do they gain by forcing parents out?
Full control over what happens. Parents that don't fight back, parents that can't afford to leave, parents that are stuck in the system, and that's it. So parents that can leave are, in my district, there was a huge group of going to the high school. A ton of the 8th grade boys left. Just so sad, because we've been a top district for so long, a really great community. And I don't want to bash my district, but what they're doing is clearly not working for families and parents if they're pulling their kids in droves, and protesting and showing up at school committee meetings. So they don't care. So they have a plan that they're implementing, and it's happening across the country, and it's going to force parents that can afford to leave, even if they have to sell their house, out of their district, and it locks and holds parents and children in that don't have options.
Okay. So now you said this has turned you into a school choice proponent. What would you like to see? What would you like to see happen? What's your kind of...
I mean, so to get into that, and I think this is an important point to make. I'd like to see school choice. So there's the great school choice advocate, Corey DeAngelis. I'm sure you've heard of him. And
yes.
and finding him was really, because I had lots of questions still. I was debating back and forth where I fell on this issue. But after listening to him for so long, and I think this is important for parents to understand. I think this will empower parents to understand. And this is a message that we have to do a better job of getting across to parents, is how education dollars work. they work per child. So it is your child's dollars that the state sends back to your school district. So, let's take my town, for example. I'll try to sum this up really quickly. We send like 60, $70 million to the state each year from my town. They reallocate every state's pot, and then they break it up into which district needs how much money. And then they allocate a specific number based by enrollment of the student population. So I think they each school district across the country has to send their state Department of Education their enrollment numbers by October of every year. And then that's how, for the following year, they allocate funding. So in my district, it's like 15,000 K per child. And that includes, teacher contracts, all of that stuff. It's one lump sum, whatever it is. I actually don't know that one includes teacher contracts, but there's another town in my state that theirs is like 22,000 per child. Now, 22,000 per child minus contractual obligations, that's like what, 10 grand, let's say a parent could actually contemplate a private school with that money.
Sure.
That's like in some 22,000 is the price of some, not in my state, but is the price of some private schools in other states. So what are we doing? So I think if parents realize, and if your child leaves, if you move your child to a charter school, that money follows your child. It is your child's money. And I think parents don't understand that. And if they did, they would be much more empowered to advocate and fight for their kids, because if not, I'm leaving and I'm taking my per pupil expenditure with me. It is not the district's money. It is the parent and child's money.
Right.
So,
it's just you have very limited ability to access it. And I'm so glad you said all this, because one of the things I've been advocating for, and it's controversial, I know, but that since the school boards really can't help you, I mean, you can go and yell and yell and yell, but they're really not going to be able to help you. And as long as the school has your kid and has your money, their incentive to do anything different, even to listen to you, is not as great.
No.
So what I've suggested to people to do, since we know they're sitting on billions in CARES Act money that is as yet unspent, okay, I have suggested that people find the count date for their state or their district and unenroll before the count date. And just wait. And then they do the count, whatever. And then if you have to re-enroll, okay, fine. But it would send a pretty big message, at least insofar as this. It would deprive them of some money, but they wouldn't then be able, because this is what they're doing now with CARES Act money and so forth. They'd have to take that money and spend it on keeping the school going, right? And teaching. They can't then go waste it on, DEI trainings and, more SEL junk and all kinds of other, things that are limited quality and not really focusing. And they might just hear the parents out, especially if it were done, we could do it quietly, but then after the date,
it doesn't work. Quietly doesn't work. And I learned
what
that.
I'm saying is initially quietly, but as soon as that date hits, have some kind of announcement where like, we, the 10,000 parents of such and such district who did this, we were coordinated. It wasn't a coincidence.
Right.
Here are our demands, and maybe publish that in the local newspaper or something like that.
That's a great idea.
That would be, I think, pretty powerful, because you have literally just cost them irrevocably millions of dollars.
Right. It's not a bad plan.
That's what
I don't know. I don't know that it would fly in my district. But
you have no solutions. You don't have any. I'm like, you might not
like solutions.
You might not like it, but if you really click your heels together, I always say you have power.
I mean, I do believe the only thing that is going to wake up, and I don't know that Rhode Island may be too far gone, and I say that sincerely and with sadness. I think Rhode Island may be too far gone for parents to make a change like that, but that's the only way it'll happen here. It's the only way. It is the only way, is if you unenroll your children from the public schools. But we're a very middle class state. I just don't see. We have hardworking families here. Tons of healthcare heroes, all of that, and teachers. We have tons of teachers. They're not just going to unenroll their kids. They have to work.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why it would be great if it could be coordinated, because I was thinking more along the lines of like, you find a church, you find it this, you find it that. And because what we have is essentially like a childcare problem for maybe, a couple days, a week, whatever. You unenroll for the count date, take a little vacation.
I don't know how you find that. I wonder.
And then go back in. Well, somebody on my channel for my locals looked up the ones for Michigan, and Michigan actually has 4 across the year.
Really?
So yeah, there was one in October, and then another one in like November, and another one in, I think, February. Another one. They had like 4 across the year that
What's
they do.
What's it called
counts.
again?
They just call them count dates. But there is a website somewhere that has all the information about governance of schools, and I've posted
Oh,
it in a bunch of
I'll
different
have to find
places
it.
that shows like, yeah, well, I'll get it. It tells you like how the different states do their funding formulas. It tells you which school boards have constitutional statutory authority to do
Yeah,
anything with curriculum. That's how I know. That's how I'm like, there's 2 states in the whole country that even touch
I'm
curriculum.
sure.
Vermont and Connecticut, that's it. So, and so let me think. So what you'd like to see is for parents to feel like they have the power to take their
So
dollars.
parents need a bill of rights. First and foremost, parents need a bill of rights, almost like you were saying, that includes a list of all of their rights under federal and state laws, as a requirement upon enrollment of your child in the school district, and then what those rights are, and then instruct, like almost a manual, and then how to go about enforcing them and holding districts accountable. And I think that's what's happened. There's been so much leeway. Like I tried to look up my district's Protection Act, PAPRA, and I couldn't find it anywhere. But and here's the thing: the law says, I looked up the state law. It says that all policy is supposed to be publicly available in the libraries, in the school office, and for parents to find easily. And like it's supposed to be organized in a very appropriate manner. That's what the law says.
It does.
I can't find it, and I can't search dates. I can't search new policy. I can't search old policy. It's all on this unbelievably, ridiculously crappy website that they've been updating for I don't know how many years, 6-7 years now. They keep paying somebody else to come in and update the websites, and it's so unuser friendly, and it's not there. So that's not abiding by the law because it's not easy for me to find.
Somebody needs to hire, like if you have law firms and they get a paralegal, it's like, okay, to the paralegal, your job is to go state by state by state and see if you can find these documents because they are by law supposed to be there. And then find every single state where you couldn't find it and draft a motion, like really just for each state and file lawsuits in every state. And I know it's time consuming and costly, but this has to at minimum be exposed.
It has to be exposed. And if parents knew, once you know that's the law, you're like, oh no, you can't do that. Like especially now being so pushed out of every decision, being shut out of schools, being shut out of teacher conferences, being shut out of school committee meetings, being, completely disenfranchised from the process of the education of our children.
Right.
Parents have to know their rights to start fighting back. And I think if they did, they would.
This is the website, by
the way.
We're not
co-parenting. We're not co-parenting here.
No. And they're behaving like an abusive ex-spouse.
And they believe that, yes.
This is Education Commission of the States.
Okay.
And here you will find research and reports. There's initiatives and projects, and then all this kind of stuff. But it gets you 50 state comparisons of things like need and merit-based financial aid, private school choice, school discipline policies, funding for key issues, pandemic policies, funding, student health and wellness, workforce development, teaching professions, school readiness, and then of course all the governance. If you go to 50 state comparisons of school governance, you see, what's the composition of the state board, what are those statutory limitations of the local district boards, all of that stuff. Like like here's your state, look across.
Here's what you do.
There it is.
I can't wait to get on there.
So you can learn so much from this one website. And I think it's a resource everybody should have. Look, somebody put Indiana count dates. Whoops, sorry.
Oh, did they put it out there?
Oh, so that one is already passed. And then February. So when you know the count dates, and then you can find them, people can organize. And once you know your per diem too, then you gotta find out your per diem.
It's so hard.
Right? But it's findable. I mean, it takes some legwork. Once you find that, and then you get your count days, you do the math. There was a parents organization in Oregon that did the math, and they figured out if we unenrolled, X number, X percent, we would cost them, this many millions of dollars. It was like $8 million. That's a sizable chunk of change.
Yeah.
And if what you're trying to do is say, we're serious. This is not just
I don't know what needs
leaving.
to happen. Yeah.
So it's a complicated, it's called Education Commission of the States.
I'm going to look at it as soon as we get out.
Yeah. And so let me put it in the link here. So here it is for the people watching. That should be like a go-to resource for you.
And I would also like to point out to parents. So the Pupil Protection Act, It's not only just what they can and cannot ask you. It was expanded under Obama, under No Child Left Behind, which they pulled No Child Left Behind, but this portion of this law still stands. They expanded that to any instructional and curriculum materials. They have to give those to you. They're supposed to be available on your district's website, or for you to review and inspect at any point. And that's not just IDEA, special disability families. That is all general education curriculum is supposed to be made available to parents, and it's not. I did try to do what you said on a state level here in Rhode Island and go through each district's website to see if they had, their policies. Did they have what their reading programs were? Because you can't even find out what reading program they're using. They just put up basically the Common Core standards and call it a day, which is not in compliance with the law or what the law was intended for. It's and I think parents have just been trusting for so long. Everything's been good, and I think now they're paying attention. And
do you have a resource, or do you know of anyone who does, that has like a, FAQs for parents to ask their district or something like that, or documents you need to have in your hand, questions you need answered?
Yeah,
I've been
looking at it. I have something very informal that I tell families and friends, and this is what you need to ask if you're going to look at this school. Ask these questions, but nothing formal. But I'll happily send it to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, that'd be great. Maybe I could put it together in something a little more formal and expand on it, because I think if we can have a resource like that for parents to just know, I mean, obviously in my perfect world, people would leave, because at least now as a form of triage for their child.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, I care about like each individual little brain and like saving them from harm.
Mm-hmm.
But long term, obviously it might be my pipe dream to have everything be, to have the public option be truly optional.
Right.
But public school isn't going away tomorrow. So we need to have ways of navigating it safe for our kids safely, and where parents aren't having their rights stripped away, where parents can put up enough of a fight that we can kind of stop the bleeding, if it makes sense.
And we can't, and we have no one helping us. And what's so shocking about this whole thing is that, in the last year of dealing with like COVID and all that, these individuals, these people we elected to represent us, who when they were on their campaign trail and running, were like, oh yeah, families are important. How many surveys have we seen where parent engagement is the top priority of a school's success? They so easily just shut the door, just shut it tight, shut the windows, and don't want anything to do with us. They don't care. They don't want us to come to meetings. They don't want to hear us speak. They don't care. And it happened like that so quickly.
Well, or it was always there and this lifted the veil.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing I think probably happened. And they felt protected enough to really show what their true agendas were, and don't get me wrong. Yes, there's an agenda, folks. Like, I hate when people say, oh, you're being crazy. There's no agenda. Yeah, there is. And if you still don't believe that there is, you better catch up quick. Wake up, because there's an agenda. It is happening. I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm not saying that, but you need to be paying attention. You need to know what your rights are and start focusing on these school committee elections and showing up.
Right.
It's now or never if you want to save the public education system.
No one else is going to defend your rights but you.
No one.
There's no one doing it now. No. Even with all the great parent groups that are forming and trying to help and everything, there is no enforcement arm. Parents are still the only people who can enforce these things. As Jody is saying, once you know your rights and you can go in and speak knowledgeably and say, nope, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
I know my rights and this is how it is. The one thing they are still afraid of, because it does cost them money, even if they end up winning in the end, is they really don't like lawsuits. They really
do. They do not. They do not like lawsuits.
Right. So they try to scare you and intimidate you into not doing that. But sometimes if you are really articulate about, I know my rights and I know what you're violating and I know this, and I'm going to get my lawyer and sue you. Sometimes all it takes is a really strongly worded letter from said lawyer. Yeah. And they're like, okay. But
that's not really
that works
here,
for one family.
Right.
That has no ripple effect to the kid right next to your kid.
This is why we need parent unions, which is happening. There is one in Rhode Island now because a group of parents got together and are suing the governor. Actually, right before I came on, they said he was making a special announcement. They got together, about 12 parents and from across the state, and they're suing the governor for his mask mandate, because whether you agree with children should be wearing masks in school or not, I'm not going to get into that debate. He overreached his authority. He doesn't have the authority to make that mandate anymore, and he went ahead and did it.
Well, and that's
There's
the beauty of that. That's also a parental right. Like, so let's say, for
yeah,
example, that you were a parent who felt like you wanted your child to wear a mask. The beauty of it is you can
yeah,
send your kid to school wearing a mask. Like, no one is going to necessarily stop your child from doing that. But for it is always a bad idea to allow an elected official to overreach their authority, because
right,
while today you might agree with that exercise of authority,
right.
tomorrow it might affect you in a negative way and you can't take it
Well,
back.
that's right. And that's exactly what happened in Rhode Island was the parents were united. Parents were talking across every district. They were going into their school committees, and the school committees knew the authority was only theirs. It's a local authority, and they didn't want it. They didn't want the legal issues that were going to come with that, because they knew local parents would sue, and they would have. They were ready to go. So they pressured, and to the last second. In fact, in the meeting where they put the mandate down in my district, the chair went, oh, we're just getting word from the state in the middle of the meeting. The governor, or the head of the Rhode Island Department of Education, the State Board of Education has mandated masks, so we have to implement this policy. It was like, and then after we got out of the meeting, I read it, and that's not exactly what they said, and they used a piece of a law that at the bottom says you don't have to comply. So it was a way to protect local school boards from lawsuits. That's what they did. They took the power from us, and parents are pissed.
But the flip side of that is they've showed that they are afraid of lawsuits.
Yeah.
So when you have the law on your side, and, and that's why knowledge is so important. Now, Valerie asks, I'm curious, what do you think that agenda is? Is it hiding how the system has failed? Like, what do you think it is?
So you brought back, like I said, I think it's to force out families that give them problems. I think it's to force out families that have the option to leave. Because I don't know, there is a handful. Like, they did a survey about, like, when we were trying to fight to go back to school, and the school committee was saying, I'll use this as an example. The school committee was saying, the majority, we are getting letters, no one wants to go back. Everybody wants to stay. We're getting lots of letters that they want to stay home and distance learn. Well, they finally put out a survey, and it was like 85% of families were wanting to go back. So they didn't send out a survey about masks, because the majority of parents do want to go back. So I think they are weeding out families that can leave to get rid of the problems. I mean, what other option? What else would it be? What else would it be?
But they lose the money when they go. So I think they actually don't believe they're going to lose as many people as they think. I feel like there's a kind of learned helplessness that comes from failing, trying and failing, trying and failing, trying and failing. And that, as long as the kids are physically there, as long as the dollars are physically there,
bodies in
the seats, you get more people each subsequent generation. I think it's been going on a long time. That's my theory, that each subsequent generation is actually more dependent on the system and has fewer options, not to mention less knowledge about how to get out of it than before. So whereas maybe 25 years ago, you would have had thousands of parents going, what the, right? With most of this, now you have hundreds.
Well,
and then
and
maybe in 10 years, you have dozens.
And during COVID, like, districts are across my state, and I don't know what the agenda is, but it's something, because I'm sorry, you don't in unison change an entire policy manual, all districts across the state changing all the same policies at the same time. Like, that doesn't happen unless there's something going on at a higher level. And like I said before, they're meeting multiple times as superintendents, as principals, as athletic associations, as school committee members,
but remember too, the longer they keep kids out, and the longer that this is all disrupted, they have so many more things to blame the failure on.
Yeah, but I mean, the data was so strong before. They were failing so
badly. They now got 2 years worth of, well, it's not our fault, we can't catch up. And the other thing it does is, the only institution we have in this country that keeps getting more money thrown its way, even as it does less and less well, even as its performance is bad,
is the Department of Education.
Correct. Yes. And that's even at the state level. So the less well they do, the more they can ask for money. And what do we see them doing? Crowing about, we need more money. Now we see Randy Weingarten saying, oh, please advocate for the passage of whatever bill it is that she wants that would make this like permanent, make certain kinds of funding permanent that don't even have anything to do with education.
Everything I'm hearing lately, and everything that comes out of the schools, nothing's about education. Nothing is about how the children are doing educationally. Yeah. Nothing is about achievement. None of it. Not an email, letter. Even and my children are in private schools, which I'm fortunate enough to be able to send them to. But we're just getting emails about, like, what are we going to do about this? I want to know how my children are doing. I want to know what we're doing what new programs are we enlisting, or, what are we doing in the schools? How are my children being educated?
Exactly.
And they don't want to answer those questions.
They're talking
the
about,
public schools don't.
they're using their voice to advocate for wealth taxes and UBI and Medicare for all. And whether you support these things or not, that's not really what
and the NE, no, that she's
the
AFT.
AFT.
Yeah,
But
I
even
don't even, she doesn't post anything about education. I do think if the silver lining of this pandemic has been parents have woken up to the fact that there is a difference between teachers and unions. I support teachers wholeheartedly. I would go to bat for any teacher. I would fund a teacher. I would hire them to come into my home. I support teachers. I do not support unions because unions do not support kids. I don't care what she says. I've gone to their national meeting website and seen what the agenda items are. I mean, they shot down an agenda item that was to make achievement the first priority again. Shot it down, but then enlisted all of these other items, social issues that they needed to address. It's like somebody put it really eloquently for me. I think he's part of that podcast, like Five Black Hands. I forget his first name, but he was like social emotional learning is like everything but the brain, everything but actual teaching. Like we're donating like so much money to these programs that haven't been vetted, that are being implemented not by trained licensed professionals, but by just college educated teachers who were just there to teach, and
sometimes not even by them.
$50 million for social emotional learning. How's the social emotional learning going like this? How's it going? The social emotional learning.
It's more than that. It's alleging something for which there is no evidence, which is that children cannot learn unless and until you address all these social emotional issues. Well, we know there are kids who are in really traumatic situations. Okay, there are kids called oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what they're called. There's a term for them where the parents like leave them with relatives and then they come back into the United States and the parents are traveling around working and so they don't speak English. Anyway, they've seen that these kids in certain special programs, even though their lives have been chaos, they're immigrant children, they do very, very well.
Look at the charter schools that LeBron James started. Those kids are like the top in this. We have a charter school here that serves Providence, and it's the top school in the state, their proficiency scores. So what are we doing wrong? This isn't, and at least if there was some level of honesty where people were coming to the table and saying, let's do this, let's talk about it, let's really see where the kids are. But they're so defiant in just avoiding those conversations. You have to submit like an APRA request to find out what the percentage of reading is in your district. It's nuts.
Or you have to wait until all the way at the end of the year or something to see the nation's report card. And then by then it's too late for your child, certainly.
Right. And,
you said, I support teachers, I support teachers unions. I've gotten to the point now where similar to police, I support police or policing. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, good cops outnumber bad cops. But I do have trouble when people will say, oh, it's only a few bad apples. And then you find out that they're not really policing themselves, that there's this tight-lipped, like, we're not ratting out the bad guys. We're just going to cover up. So I'll support teachers as long as they are more willing to support themselves.
Or more willing to support our kids.
The kids.
I can't tell you how many teachers I've had over the years say to me, like, not for my children, but like teachers in other districts would say to me, oh, yeah, I'm a special educator in this district. And if I advocate too much for a child at a meeting, like I get reprimanded, like I can get fired if I try too hard for a kid, if I push for that service for a kid. They'll pull me aside and be like, you have to stop. We can't afford that. We can't do it. So, teachers are scared, and that is where I am now. Right now, I'm at the point where we need more brave teachers to stand up and start speaking out against what is happening to the kids in these schools.
Right. And that's what I'm talking
about. They're resilient is not what I'm not buying that. They're not
brave teachers.
Look at the healthcare. That's a good. I support brave teachers.
Yeah.
And I would.
Brave teachers support kids because, as you just pointed out, supporting kids carries a liability for your livelihood.
Right.
And I think what the message I'd like to get out to teachers who are wavering or nervous is, look, I'm currently literally unemployable. I'm unemployable in most fields. I have to do what I can to tutor privately and whatever because no one is going to hire me. But
because of your advocacy work?
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of how I feel in this state too.
Not happening.
I don't think it would happen.
that's a chance I took doing it, but I thought to myself, I have 3 daughters just like you, and they're growing up in this country the way it is, and I can't if I can do something, I feel like I have to do something.
Yeah, I can't not.
I
People
can't
have
not
said to me,
either.
well, how do you put yourself out there like that? Why are you putting yourself out there? I can't not. I cannot
Right.
watch what is happening with all the knowledge I learned going through that process. And I do think there are well-meaning, I have many neighbors and good friends who are advocating for the opposite of what I advocate for. And they truly believe that that is the right thing to do for specific reasons, but they have no understanding of like how that law got passed, who's pushing this and why, what the legislators are doing at the top, what the unions are saying about this, how the money works, what happened 3 years ago that led to this.
Right.
So I respect people that have opinions about how their children should be educated and what is appropriate for their own child. And but there's a wealth of knowledge that goes behind the decisions that I make, and almost a decade experience at going at getting services and understanding how the process works, that I have an educated opinion, a very strongly educated opinion about my schools and the schools in my town and the schools in my state and how they're run.
Right.
And it was, I'll tell you, it was a school committee member who is no longer on the school committee who said to me, I was trying to advocate for reading instruction, and he said, you should just really go to the state. You should like start advocating there. Like, we can't really do much. And I was like, okay. And I did. So, that's when I started my Twitter account. and that's when I started meeting with the former commissioner, and testifying on bills and helping write bills. But that's where I learned where the unions come into that's where I learned that the unions have comment on legislation and oppose legislation, and that if an elected official who they helped get elected is on that committee, they will kill that bill.
Right.
So it's just,
and
process.
every state needs a Jody Stone at this point. I mean, no, for real, because each state, as you just pointed out, is different. And I mean, enough that you need to have sort of the resident expert on that state, even though there are certain common threads throughout. And that's why I shared that website. But I think, it's just really important what you said at the outset. It's really important for parents to understand that at this juncture, advocating for your child means you have to do some homework. It's not just, I'm going to go volunteer in the school, or I'm going to, go to the PTA meetings or the school board meetings. You need to take time outside the school, away from the school, doing a little homework, researching your parental rights, researching the law, researching, as much as you can, even asking questions. They do have to, by law, answer you if you go to the school and say, can you tell me what reading program you're using? They can't not tell you.
No, yeah, right.
Okay, so they might try to not tell you, or tell you won't understand.
Well, and parents are like, they're like, oh, we use it, but they take the answer. Parents take the answer. Parents don't want to be seen as troublemakers. I think that's stopping a little bit, but because they're so fed up. But they don't want to be seen as anti-teacher. They don't want to question. They want to be seen as great parents by the schools. And the schools, look, they use that.
Yeah.
They make you, and I learned that through this process, because there's hundreds of millions of more of me. Of parents who've gone through the same thing, is they make you be that mom. So they can say, oh,
I was that mom.
She's crazy.
They'd see me coming and they'd be like, oh my God.
They're like, oh, this mom. But then I would get those teachers that would pull me aside and be like, you're doing it. Like, I'm doing the same thing. I'm copying your letter. Like, or great job. You're doing it. So teachers helped me get to where I am, or look into this, or did you know this? Like, things like that happen. So they're there. I think, we've just got to stop being scared to stand up against our schools. We're paying for it through our property taxes and on our state allocations. And if we are compelled by law to send our children to get an education, we damn well better make sure they're getting a good education. Like, otherwise, what else are we doing? What's the purpose?
Exactly. Thank you. What a great place to finish. It's a great question. Everybody go ask yourself that question now. And if you don't have an answer, that's your homework. This is Deb, the teacher, talking now. That is your homework. Jody, I cannot thank you enough for coming in and spending the time talking to us and educating us about these things and having this conversation. It's just so to me, it gives me hope. It kind of reaffirms that, or so what's it called? Restores my faith in humanity. When I see people like you, and I know Erica and Asra and other people are out there just fighting, or on the front lines, they're taking the heat, and we need more of you.
Well,
and we need more brave teachers. So thank you very much. And if there's anything
thank you for having
that
me.
I can ever do, the platform is yours. Come
Great.
back
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
It was nice to chat with you.
You too. Thanks everybody for watching. Take care.
Bye.